Hello, in this part 2, we'll see with the results. We created everything, so now we go and run the app. And the reason we split this in part 2 is that part 1 took very long time, almost half an hour, and so we had to cut it shorter and add this extension to part 2. And you see now the PickerView has the different features, and I can see the meters, mile, inch, and kilometer, and feet. One observation, you notice that kilometer is cut off, and that basically means that the width of the component is smaller than the width of the needed for the text. So I can fix this by going to the storyboard and increasing the width of the component. And you want to set it up. I'm going to bring in another component next to it, so I don't want to increase the width too much. And at the same time, I want to make sure that it covers all the text that I have in the units. So you may want to measure it to the width of your longest, wider text. So I will run this to see. So here you are now, kilometer is fully displayed, feet. So that finishes this part, and now we have all our the units displayed in the PickerView. So that completes iteration number 2, and we are now ready to move on to iteration number 3. But before we do that, I want to add an optional item. So again, this is optional, so you don't have to do that. You notice that the list of units came in a different order than the order that I had in my file here. So because the file loads this dictionary, and in our code we retrieve the dictionary using the all keys, and it gives us an array of all the keys, it did not sort those keys. So they come in different arrangements as we saw here. So what I would like to see if we can add is if we can sort those maybe alphabetically, or you can sort them based on anything that you want to sort them with. You can sort them, so here is the list, so you can sort them based on these values if you want. If we want to get them in that list, we can sort them based on these values, or we can sort them based on this. So how can we sort that collection? And that's what we will talk about. So here is the collection coming in an array like that. So this collection that has the names will be used again, the names of the units will be used again in the convert function. So I realized that although here I'm implementing or retrieving the keys or the unit names from the dictionary inside the titleForRow, which means once I implemented the convert, I'm going to have to retrieve them one more time. And if I'm going to sort them, I'm going to have to sort them one more time. Whenever you face a situation where there's a possibility that the code will be repeated, you want to consider to put it in a place where it doesn't have to be repeated. All what this titleForRow needs is this array, this access to an NS array called keys. So if I define keys as I defined units as a class variable, I can then initialize it in the viewDidLoad once I initialize the units. So I can initialize both the units and the keys at the same time. And in this case, the titleForRow will not have to be responsible for initializing the names. So I'm going to delete this from here, from 39, line 39, or maybe comment it out for now. So comment this out. Then I'm going to define keys to be an NS array, and I'm going to define it here in the class variable. So I will say variable keys, and then I will say this is an NS array and exclamation mark. So now this is good. So this function now is working well, but it doesn't know what the contents are of the array. So then I need to retrieve, initialize that keys array. So I will come here after I create the unit and say initialize the keys with the names of the units. And I'm actually going to take back what I said about optional. So far, this is not optional. The only optional part is the sorting. So, but moving the keys from, retrieving the unit names from the title for row, from here to the viewed load, that is not optional. We have to do that. And if we don't do it here, we're going to do it in the next iteration. So now we can initialize keys by saying that units dot all keys, and then we get that as ns array, which is the same line that we had over there in the back. Oh, and this is we need as without the exclamation. So now this should function exactly the same way as it functioned before. All I did is I took the creation of the keys from the titleForRow function to the viewed load, so that keys is now available in memory throughout my application. So I can now delete this line from here. And to make sure that it did not mess up what I have already, I run it and I should see my unit list the same way it was before. Then I want to do the sort, and now that is the optional part, sorting this array. So to sort, it's a little bit tricky because Swift offers you flexibility to sort in any way, shape, or form that you would like. But for us as a beginner, that makes it a little bit complicated because there is no direct function that will sort the array for us that we can call. So we're going to have to make our own function that is responsible for sorting the array. In fact, there is a function here for sorting an array, but it depends on something else. So let's take a look at that. If I say keys.sort, there is a function called sort. So let's take a look at it. This function will need another function that gives it a boolean, that returns a boolean, and it passes to it any two variables. So this function goes through the array, looks at the elements of the array one by one, and then compares the first element with the one next to it. Then the next element with the one next to it. And once it retrieves two elements of the array, it goes to another function and says, how do you want me to order those? And that other function needs to do the comparison between those two elements and return that comparison back to this function. It sends the elements to type any object, which is a generic type, not a string. So keep that in mind. Then it returns back another array that is sorted. So if I call the sort function on the keys, it returns back a sorted array. So I can use that sorted array and put it back in the keys. So I override what's inside the key. So I can come here and say keys equal. So the sort will give me back a sorted array and assign that sorted array back to the key. So I override key with the sorted element. Now, what goes here is that this needs of the sort function to work needs another function that receives two parameters, as you see, and returns back a boolean. So I can define another function sort array or sort keys. That function needs to receive any object, so I'm going to call it first, and it has to be of type any object. And then maybe second is the second parameter, and it has to be of type any object. Then this function needs to return the Boolean type, which is a true or false. Then I define the body of the function. So the definition of the function, other than the name, came from what sort needs. Then instead of that template, I put my function name. and function name without the parentheses. I don't need to provide the parentheses because it's gonna be called directly. So this is something, Swift has a lot of flexibility with functions, and I'm kind of trying to give you something that builds on what we learned before. But if you want to look into functions and block and something called the closures, you will see a lot of cool things that you can do in Swift. So now we say that sort automatically gonna call the sort function and send it the first element, second element, then it's gonna iterate again, send the second and the third, and so on. What this function needs to provide is a comparison between these two elements and returns as Boolean. These two elements are the keys, but they are not as a string, so I can convert them. So I say let first key equal first, and then convert from any object to string. And then the second key equal second as string. So then we need to make the comparison. So you can compare based on the name. So I can do ascending or descending order based on the name of the unit, or I can compare based on the value, whatever you want. I'm just gonna compare based on the name. So to compare based on the name and they are both a string, I can say first key, and then there's a function called case insensitive compare. The case insensitive compare function takes a second string and return something called comparison result. So I will use this function and pass to it the second key. Then the result of that function, I'm gonna compare it with whatever order you want. So I use a built-in order called ns comparison result, and then there is order ascending, descending, or the same. So I'm gonna use order ascending. This comparison gives me back Boolean because I have here logical comparison. And this one needs a return for a Boolean, so I'm gonna add a return here. So the function sorted keys will retrieve the first element and convert it to a string, second element and convert it to a string, then will return a Boolean based on the case insensitive comparison between the second key and the first key in an ascending order. And whatever is sorted, I'm gonna assign it back to keys. So when the title for row is about to display, it's gonna use the sorted keys, not the unsorted one. So let's try that. So now here we have a sorted list based on ascending order in all the keys. If you want to sort based on something else, you can sort based on something else here, define the variable. One thing we can do to clean that, I can say let comparison equal, and this comparison will be Boolean, and say here return comparison, if you don't want to return the full comparison here. So I can take that comparison, the result of the comparison, whether it's false or true, and say return that comparison here. So now that goes back, sorted key will return a comparison between any two numbers, any two parameters, and sort will send the two parameters automatically. So that's how we can sort. So I'll add comment here, sort the keys alphabetically in ascend. So that completes this part. As I mentioned, moving the keys to a class variable is important to do, and we have to do. And then the sort part, if that confuses you, this line you don't have to do, or if you already reach it here, you probably have done it, so you can go ahead and do it as well. But it's not expected that you sort the array for the project. Thank you.